All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's on the Power. So I wanted to make a video about Lee Priest. I've said many times that Lee Priest is my favorite bodybuilder, but I wanted to make a video in particular about why Lee Priest was such a good bodybuilder during his era. Obviously, Lee Priest came along in the mid-90s, really during the era of the Mass Monster, during Dorian Yates' Olympia reign. And his bodybuilding career at the Olympia would span the reign of three different Mr. Olympias in Jay Cutler, Ronnie Coleman, and Dorian Yates. And you could also include Dexter Jackson in that group because Dexter won the 2008 Mr. Olympia, and Lee Priest did make that comeback in 2013 at the Mr. Universe. So technically, Lee Priest beat 3 of the 4 Mr. Olympias that he competed against during his bodybuilding career at some point or another on the Olympia stage. So Lee Priest's Olympia career would begin in 1997, which would be the final year that Dorian Yates would win the Mr. Olympia. Lee Priest would place 6th at the 1997 Mr. Olympia, and this was a lineup of many mass monsters. You had Nasser El Somebody, you had Dorian Yates, you had a young Ronnie Coleman who would win the Olympia the following year, you had Paul Dillette, you had Mike Matarazzo, you had J.P. Fuchs, and of these guys, Lee Priest placed 6th, beating J.P. Fuchs, Ronnie Coleman, and Mike Matarazzo. Now, this is the reason why I find Lee Priest to be such an impressive competitor. He was much smaller, both in a standpoint of height and a standpoint of muscle mass, than many of the competitors in the 90s and the early 2000s. Lee Priest stood only 5 foot 4 inches tall, weighing roughly in the 220s on stage. But he was beating guys that weighed 50 or even 60 pounds more than him, and that was 50 to 60 pounds of muscle. For example, in 1998, when he placed 7th at the Mr. Olympia, he beat Paul Dillette, he beat Gunter Schlierkamp, he beat Ernie Taylor. Paul Dillette and Gunter were guys that weighed 270, 280 on stage. Again, 50 to 60 pounds heavier than Lee Priest. Now, in 1999, Lee would place 8th at the Mr. Olympia, beating Jay Cutler, Dexter Jackson, and Marcus Rule. Marcus Rule, probably the biggest of the guys that Lee Priest has beaten, and Lee Priest has beaten him several times on stage, routinely actually. So then the following year, at the 2000 Mr. Olympia, Lee Priest moves back up to 6th place, beats Jay Cutler again, beats Dexter Jackson again. So now he has beaten 3 Mr. Olympias during his Olympia career. He beats Gunter Schlierkamp again, and Gunter Schlierkamp is the guy that would give Ronnie Coleman a run for his money in 2002. He beats Marcus Rule again in 2000. Now fast forward to the 2002 Mr. Olympia. Lee Priest placed 6th again. And in this show, he actually beats Flex Wheeler. And also the 2002 Olympia is one of the most stacked Olympias ever, having 25 competitors. So Lee Priest placed 6th out of 25, beating a total of 19 guys for that placing. So even though Lee Priest never actually won a Mr. Olympia or never won an Arnold Classic, he did win the Ironman Pro, and he did win the Night of Champions in New York. And he also won the San Francisco Pro as well. But even though he never won that Olympia, I think the fact that he consistently placed so highly against guys that were clearly just monstrously bigger than him makes him the embodiment of what bodybuilding is really about. A bigger guy with worse conditioning, worse symmetry, just less balance and less proportionality is not going to beat a smaller guy like Lee Priest when Lee Priest comes correct and has that good proportion and that good structure. And that's the embodiment of what I think bodybuilding should be about. And of course, in addition to that, in my opinion, Lee Priest had some of the greatest arms in the history of bodybuilding. And then, of course, you also have the unfortunate fact that Lee Priest was banned from the IFBB in 2006 for competing in a non-sanctioned organization's competition. And, of course, I did a video separately on that, but I think it's a shame that Lee Priest was kind of, made into the black sheep of the IFBB when he did, he achieved some great things. I mean, beating 3 out of 4 future or former Mr. Olympia competitors that he would go head-to-head with is very impressive. Having Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler, and Dexter Jackson on the list of guys you've beaten during your professional career is a very impressive list. So that's the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave it a thumbs up if you did enjoy it, and let me know in the comment section below about what you think in terms of Lee Priest versus these guys much bigger than himself, and the fact that he was the giant killer of the 90s and early 2000s. Thank you guys for watching the video.